Alrighty, so I'm going to do a quick introduction to functions in JavaScript. I'm going to try to cover at least some of the basics so you can get started with functions. Hope you enjoy. Let's begin by opening up a new file here. I'm going to be running this on the command line so that it's just easier to present here, but all this stuff is going to run in a browser, perfectly fine, no modifications needed. So let's start with a simple declaration of a sum function that takes two arguments and returns, well, eventually will return the output. Alright, here's a declaration of a function. You have the function keyword, you're going to have the name of your function, and your arguments being passed in. So for here, let's just go ahead and log out the result of this function. Okay, let's go ahead and save this out and give it a try. So we'll go ahead and try this out, and we'll see what it logs. Alright, there we go. It logs out 3. Excellent work. Okay, so we've written our first function. Now, this is not actually returning something. So if I say, then x is still not defined. See? So it's not returning the value. Let's go back and fix this issue. So here we'll change it to a return statement. And now this will be the output of the function. So this can then be chained and used as needed. And we'll see that in just a second. Okay, so here we'll do the same thing. And now x has the value 3. You can also, as I said, you can chain these, so you could do sum like this. So the output of the sum 2, 3 goes into the second argument of the sum function. So you can pass them in that way. So this is very useful. This is the basic functionality of sums. And so let's go ahead and do a modification of something. So I'm going to give you an example. Usually with these primitives, which would be numbers, integers, strings, booleans, things like that, they'll be copied as arguments into the function. So for example, if I write a function like this, and I try to modify something, it's not going to modify it. If I say x equals 4, and then I pass in modify x, x is still 4. And it's because that's a primitive. So like I said, that's numbers, strings, booleans, things like that. Now if you pass in an object, it will actually modify it. So if I have a set first item function, so this one, if I pass in a list, it will actually change it. So let's do this with a variable. See, it has actually changed the variable itself. So that's important to keep in mind. The other thing to realize is that this set first item doesn't actually have a return value. So often in computer science lingo terms, we refer to this as an output, even though it's not actually a return value, since the argument being passed in is changed after the function is executed. In general, it's best practice to try not to modify things when they get passed in. So let's say we wanted to find the sum of the first n numbers. Okay, so basically what this says is, okay, if we're going to pass in a value of n that's less than 0, just return 0. That's not the first n numbers. So if we do a number above that, let's say 5. So the first time this goes through, it's going to say, okay, is it less than 0? No, it's not. Or is it less than or equal to 0? No, it's not. So then we return the sum of 4 plus n, which is 5. And so it keeps going down. So it'd be, the second time through, it's 4 plus, and then it's 3 plus, and 2 plus, 1 plus, and then when it says 0, it returns 0. So let's see if we actually got this right. Okay, so 5 plus 4 is 9, and then plus 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14, plus 1 is 15. Excellent, this works. And like I said, if we pass in a negative number here, it's going to be 0. So the way this works is you're making the call to the function inside here, so that it's recursive. So it goes back into a loop. And usually when you're doing recursion, you're going to have some sort of condition for it to stop. Almost always you're going to have that. And in JavaScript, we do this by way of a conditional statement. So let's go and do one more thing with functions that are really, really important. This one will involve multiple functions, but instead of returning a regular value of like string, boolean, array, we're going to actually return a function. So let's call this function multiply. So now, of course, we could just return a times b, but in this case, let's do what is called currying, which is where they call it partial application. And we'll explain why in just a second. So we're going to return a function, and then this function will return a. And actually, I shouldn't have this next argument here. So this is going to be a multiply function that returns a function that multiplies. So here, if we think about this for a second, so if I set this to be some value, let's call it double it, and we say multiply 2. So multiply 2 is going to turn a function that multiplies whatever value that's passed in by 2. So now double it is a function. And let's go into the interactive console here to try this out. Okay, so let's set double. Okay, so now if we look at double it, it should be a function, and it is. So here, what we'll need to do is then pass in a value, and there we go. So this also follows that you could then have implicitly, without having to assign it to a variable, return the function and then apply it. So that will look something like this. So this would be a triple function, and then we pass in whatever value we're trying to triple. And there we go, 3 times 6. So the reason this is called partial application is because you're not actually doing the application until the second call through. Now this technique is it's not super prevalent in JavaScript, but once you get to frameworks and libraries that have designed entire JavaScript objects and such, you'll find that they're pretty common. So this is also an important technique to know about. One last thing. So when you're declaring a function, you can do it in the way I've been declaring it, or you can actually assign it to a variable, sort of like we did with this double it equals multiply 2. So you could just have a function sum that is just a variable. And that right there is a totally valid function. We can use it exactly the same way. There we go. So I hope that you enjoyed this. It was informative for understanding basic functions in JavaScript. Now go out there and solve some problems.